Hello and welcome to my first History Long. Basically, something I talked about in a history short. Side note, but I do shorts about history and related stuff. Check them out if you feel like it. Anyway, this is the first History Long where I take a subject from history short and I expand it into a full-length video. I have one or two other ideas for these, but feel free to request one if you think a short is particularly interesting. If I have more to say, I might make a video. The subject of this is Tom Harrisson, the most offending soul alive. Some people feel the need for the main character in more than one story. Harrisson is just that sort of man. He did a lot of impressive things, and not all of it good. He was a very important anthropologist, also a filmmaker, soldier, professional crazy person, passionate ornithologist, amateur irritator of people, probable rapist, and kind of a war criminal. Harrisson was born in 1911 in Argentina to British parents. His dad was an engineer, building railways. Eventually he was dumped, his word, in Harrow, the elite boys' school in London. His parents were distant, often literally, but his aunt was Ada Cole, a notable animal rights campaigner. And he was raised in natural history books which fostered a lifelong interest in nature. In Harrow, he developed this interest, along with another that would be important for the rest of his life, influencing people. He somehow managed to corral 1,300 boys to a census of the great crested glebe, a pioneering study in ornithology. Eventually, he ended up in Cambridge and worked on another important element for the rest of his life, not giving a fuck. He attended classes in open-toed sandals with bright red painted toes. This was the very early 30s. Harrisson himself thought his almost reflexive disdain for norms came from feeling like an outsider in both Argentina and the UK. As someone who has never sounded like where they're from and is assumed to be a foreigner literally everywhere they go, this kind of tracks. He eventually left Cambridge and did the exact same sort of thing in Oxford. How better to irritate and confuse the rich and famous of the British upper crust. He even published a book called A Letter to Oxford, which was banned in the university. Actually, thinking about it, you could make an argument that Tom Harrisson is what happens when a member of Monty Python is born 30 years early. Anyway, he joined the Exploration Club. Because it's Oxford, of course there's an Exploration Club. I went to the Arctic with them. That's officially my connection to the polar history stuff I usually do. And in 1932 ended up spending 6 months in northern Borneo, still owned by the British Empire at the time. The south was owned by the Dutch. The expedition was meant to be bird watching with a bit of old school anthropology, essentially going off into the jungle, and hanging out being very British near the locals.
While I was down there, I caught the attention of a young Maasai woman.
You didn't.
She took me for an exotic, sophisticated Superman of sorts and developed something of a liking to me.
Well, isn't that always the way?
Harrisson, though, had other ideas and ran off into the deeper jungle to live with the headhunters, the Dyaks. You see, the British and the Dutch had spent generations attempting to stamp out the practice of headhunting in Borneo, the taking and veneration of human heads, and had succeeded everywhere but the very, very deepest jungle. He spent months learning the language of the Dyaks, eating their food, wearing their clothing, getting tribal tattoos, taking part of their rituals, doing what they did, eventually becoming one of the creators of deep immersion anthropology that's become the norm. What would also become the norm was Harrisson writing books about his experiences, like this one about his next deep immersion expedition, Living with Cannibals. This was the New Hebrides, now Vanuatu. I don't know if he ate any human flesh, but I wouldn't be that surprised. This is where his deep immersion approach really crystallized. He wrote another book about the experience called Savage Civilization, though the Savage Civilization, the title, wasn't the people of Vanuatu, it was the white people colonizing them. He was meant to be there for a few months, but he ended up staying for years because he'd had an affair with the expedition leader's wife and he got left behind in the docks when the boat left. Anyway, after eventually getting home, he turned his eye on a far stranger people, the British working class. He dropped all contact with his friends, moved to Bolton, got a job in a cotton mill, and observed the English working class in their natural habitat, suffering for the benefit of rich people who wouldn't piss on them if they were on fire. He published The Pub and the People based on his observations, and in 1939 presented a BBC documentary about the different peoples of London. Strange exotic people like Cockneys, Jewish people, and Chinese immigrants. Like so much great, terrible, and fascinating sounding media, this documentary seems to be lost. When World War II broke out, Harrisson did some advising to the government on propaganda about getting their messages out to the British people, but eventually signed up for the war, became a major and was assigned to the Australian Operation CMAT. dedicated to the liberation of Borneo from the Japanese. This ended his first marriage. His wife gave him an ultimatum. It was either her and the baby, or the likely suicide mission. Likely because every other attempt at this mission had failed. Harrisson had worked out where the previous missions had failed, though. The teams were left at the coast and travelled on foot, and they were caught. Harrisson insisted on being parachuted into the deep jungle, Dayak territory, where he could use his knowledge to contact the locals. The British government wanted him to create a network of fighters who would be willing to support the Australian army when they came to invade and liberate the island. Harrisson, though, had other ideas. First up, he insisted his commandos go deep immersion, even going as far as refusing to let them touch the supplies parachuted in for them. This was important for two reasons. They couldn't be sure they were receiving more, so better not lean on it. And two, it helped connect them with the locals. He wouldn't even let his men wear shoes, because if the Japanese came into the area and saw boot prints, they'd realise they were there, because the Dayaks didn't wear shoes. And then they'd start killing the locals. Harrisson even threatened to shoot a team doctor, who was a superior officer, for countermanding his barefoot order. Tom then set himself up as a semi-divine figure. You see, the peoples of North Borneo have some myths that the British had used to maintain some control. On top of that, the tribesmen had seen him and the commandos parachuting down to Earth. They only had limited contact with the outside world and took the parachuting as a sign of his magical powers. They noticed the gold crown in his uniform and that the other white men would take his orders, so he quickly became, in his own words, a Raja. This is maybe a good time to explain that the footage I've been using comes from Farewell to the King, a John Milius film inspired by Tom Harrisson's time in Borneo. Okay, technically it's based on a novel, but the novel was based on Harrisson. Anyway, Harrisson had no interest in setting up a network over thousands upon thousands of square miles through thick jungle, train literally thousands of tribesmen how to use modern weapons, and then sit back and wait for the Australians to arrive. So he told the local leaders that the British had decided that the ancient tradition of headhunting was acceptable after all, but only Japanese heads. And not only that, but he offered them a bounty for every Japanese head brought to him.
And he would pay them 5 guilders per head.
That's when the nightmare started, and from that day to this day I've had nightmares.
So Japanese patrols that went too far into the jungle started to vanish. Guns, grenades, swords, bows, arrows, and blowpipes were all used. Dayak women would bathe naked in rivers to entice soldiers into traps. They raided wherever possible. Head after head was brought to Harrisson. And when the Australians finally arrived, Harrisson's commandos and the Dayaks unleashed hell on the occupying forces, murdering everyone at wireless installations and taking control. Harrisson estimated that they killed literally every Japanese person in some parts of the island. It's not known exactly how many Japanese people were killed by Harrisson's personal army, but it's estimated to be at least 1,000. As the resistance to the Australian army, almost 50,000 strong, crumbled, the Japanese began to retreat into the jungle, and a lot of them were never seen again. They were still finding remains for literally years afterwards. But not all the dead were murdered. Some Japanese soldiers gave up and killed themselves rather than face the jungle, the Australians, and the Dayaks. A month after Hiroshima, the Japanese commander in Borneo came out of hiding to surrender, and Harrisson was sent on his final mission, to find a captain with 500 men who was still at large. So Harrisson, the Dayaks, and the commandos tracked him down, killed some of his men, terrorized the rest, and personally took a surrender. Harrisson celebrated this by having sex with a POW, an army nurse. He said it was consensual, but honestly, I am kinda doubtful. You might actually be somewhat familiar with Harrisson's Guerrilla Army. The show, Secrets of the Dead, did an episode called The Airmen and the Headhunters with a downed B-24 bomber. The American survivors were protected by the Dayaks and brought to Harrisson, who organised their escape by building a bamboo runway in the middle of the jungle. When it comes to men lost and men killed, Operation Seamoot is the most successful Australian intelligence operation of the Second World War. Harrisson spent the years after the war living in the jungles of Borneo, continuing his anthropology, turning a small local museum into a world-class anthropological centre. He even branched out into archaeology and found evidence that humans lived in Borneo 50,000 years ago, much earlier than was accepted at the time. This was around the time his second marriage failed, not for any normal reason, but because neither him nor his wife had much money and he fancied marrying a rich lady instead.
My interview with Tom was one of the most absurd job interviews in the world. He said, yeah, come and see me. I'm getting divorced on Tuesday, getting married again on Thursday. Come and see me on Wednesday.
At one point, while Harrisson was living in Borneo, the World Health Organization sprayed longhouses in the Calabat region against malarial mosquitoes, which also killed the cockroaches which the local cats ate, meaning the region had an explosion of rats. So Harrisson personally organised parachute drops of feral cats rounded up in other parts of the island. But Harrisson had yet more escapades. For instance, during the 1962 Brunei Revolt, he raised an army of 2,000 Dayaks who were instrumental in its defeat. He also founded a school and got to know a young David Attenborough.
I first came to know Tom Harrisson some 50 years ago.
When he rocked up to him with 6 episodes of a documentary series about Borneo that he wanted to put on the BBC. Attenborough was a BBC producer, kinda high up at the time.
First of all, let me put you in the big picture.
And as you can see, Harrisson by this point had turned into the human version of the Absorbaloff after he ate Genghis Khan. In the mid-60s, Harrisson was working for Cornell University and was banned from Borneo when it was revealed that he'd sold museum artifacts to a museum in Brunei without permission. He explained that they were from his own private collection and not the museum that he'd created and run, but his not giving a fuck had made him too many enemies in the post-colonial government, and he never set foot in Borneo again. Ironically, for a man who spent so much time living in the jungle, Harrisson was killed in a traffic accident. He was in Thailand when the bus he was in crashed. It was 1976. And that was the tale of Tom Harrisson. Incredible guy, incredible achievements, almost as incredible a dick. Hope you enjoyed my first history along. Hopefully it won't be the last. I have some more ideas, and if another short caught your eye and you want to know more about the subject, please feel free to leave it in the comments. I might do a long. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed the video, please tell me how amazing my sleazy delivery is. And if you want to support the show more directly, please consider checking out the Patreon, or the Ko-fi, or the Redbubble. There's a sweet Francis Crozier straight out of Banbridge shirt.